28. I lost my hearing after childbirth. My husband began speaking about me in front of me. The room was warm from the wood stove, and I was sitting in my usual chair by the window, the one with the worn armrest where I always rested my elbow during long evenings. There were 4 people in that room besides me: my husband Eli, his brother Caleb, our bishop, Reuben Stoltz, and Deacon Hartman, who had driven nearly 2 hours from the neighboring district and had not once looked at me since he arrived. I was 31 years old. My daughter was 4 months old and sleeping in the back room, and I was sitting close enough to the wood stove to feel its heat on the side of my face, watching 4 men discuss what would happen to me, to my child, and to my marriage, while I sat right there among them. They were not whispering. They did not lower their voices. They spoke with the calm, unhurried confidence of men who believed, with complete certainty, that I could not hear a single word they said. What I need you to understand, before I tell you how I arrived at that chair, in that room, on that particular evening, is that they were not entirely wrong. To explain what I mean, I have to go back to the February before Hannah was born, when I was still a woman who could hear rain on a tin roof and distinguish my mother-in-law's footstep from my own husband's, before either of them reached the kitchen door. I had been married to Eli Brenneman for 3 years. We lived in a community in eastern Ohio, in a district that was neither the strictest nor the most lenient I had known. Our bishop, Reuben Stoltz, was a careful man. Careful with words, careful with money, careful with the boundaries he drew around what was permitted and what was not. I had grown up 2 districts away and had known Eli since I was 19. We had courted for 14 months. Our families approved. Our bishop approved. I had believed, in the way that young women believe things when they have not yet been given a reason to doubt, that this meant everything would be all right. The first year of our marriage was unremarkable, in the way that I now understand means quietly controlled. Eli did not shout. He did not strike. He prayed at every meal and helped his father with the fields, and was considered, by every measure our community used, a good man. What he did was smaller than shouting. He decided things. He decided what we needed from town, and what we could go without. He decided which of my relatives we visited, and how long we stayed. He decided that my sister Ruth's husband was not a settled man, and so Ruth's visits became less frequent, and then rare. And then I noticed one winter that I had not seen her since the previous spring. I did not call this control. In our household, the word we used was order. A family needed order. A husband provided it. I had been raised to believe this, and I had not yet collected enough experience to know what order was supposed to feel like from the inside. Hannah's pregnancy changed the air between us in a way I could not name at the time. Eli became attentive in a way that felt more like surveillance than care. He began accompanying me to the midwife, which was unusual. He began asking detailed questions afterward, about what she had said, what she had recommended, what she had asked me. I told myself he was anxious. First child. It was understandable. Hannah arrived in a hard October. 3 days of labor. A midwife named Clara who had delivered half the children in our district, and a room so quiet afterward that I thought the silence was exhaustion. It was not exhaustion. 3 days after Hannah was born, I noticed that Clara's voice, when she came to check on me, seemed to be arriving from a distance it had no reason to be at. I asked her to repeat herself. She did. I still caught only the shape of her words. I pressed my fingers against my ears and found nothing. No blockage, no pain, no explanation. Just a wall of softened sound where there had once been clarity. By the end of the first week, my right ear had reduced to a kind of low hum. By the end of the second, my left ear had followed. Clara told Eli something had happened during the birth. A sudden pressure change, she believed, or something in the blood, and that I should be seen by a proper doctor in town. Eli thanked her. He told me she was worried over nothing. He did not take me to a doctor. I want to be fair about those early months, because fairness matters more to me now than it did then, when I had no energy for anything except learning to survive inside a world that had gone suddenly and completely muffled. I could hear, but the way you hear when your head is underwater. Shapes of sound, volume without detail, a church hymn reduced to rhythm, a baby's cry, thank God, still penetrating, sharp enough to wake me, but my husband's voice at a normal speaking distance, becoming something I had to piece together like a torn letter. I learned to read lips. Not formally, not with instruction. There was no instruction available to me in our district, but by necessity, in the way that people learn to walk again after an illness, using whatever the body still has. I watched mouths. I watched jaws. I watched the way Eli's upper lip moved when he was telling me something he considered settled, versus when he was asking a question. I watched the way Bishop Stoltz tucked his chin before he delivered a judgment. I watched all of this quietly, and I said nothing about how much I understood, because no one asked. This is the part I need you to hold carefully. No one asked me what I could still hear. No one tested me. No one sat beside me and spoke at different volumes to understand where my hearing had gone and where it remained. They saw a woman who did not respond normally to sound, and they concluded, swiftly and with what I now believe was a kind of relief, that she could not hear them. Eli told his mother I was almost entirely deaf. His mother told the deacon's wife. The deacon's wife told the bishop's household. Within 6 weeks of Hannah's birth, every person of influence in our district believed that Sarah Brenneman could not hear a conversation held at normal volume in the same room. None of them were exactly lying. They had simply stopped at the most convenient version of the truth. And because I did not correct them, because I was frightened and exhausted, and not yet certain myself what I could and could not understand, I became, in everyone's accounting, a woman who could not hear. Spring came late that year, slow and gray, and I moved through it the way I moved through most of that period. Carefully, watchfully, conscious of how much information I was gathering that no one knew I was gathering. I watched Eli speak to his brother Caleb on the porch one evening. I was visible through the window. Neither of them looked at me. Caleb's mouth formed the word arrangement. Then later, property. Then, more clearly than anything else, the word that turned my blood cold. Consent. I moved away from the window before they turned around. I want to tell you that I formed a plan that night. I want to tell you I was strategic and clear-eyed from that moment forward. The truth is that I sat beside Hannah's cradle for a long time, and I did not know what I was afraid of yet. I only knew that the word consent had been spoken on my own porch, by my husband's brother, in a conversation I was not supposed to be part of. Summer brought 2 things. A visit from my mother, a short one, strained, the kind of visit that happens when a woman is trying to determine if her daughter is all right without asking directly, and a visit from Deacon Hartman, who came for supper, and stayed long enough for me to watch him and Eli exchange a look over the table that had the particular quality of men who have agreed on something before they sat down to eat. My mother stood in the kitchen with me the morning before she left, and she held my hands, and she looked at me for a long time. Her lips moved slowly, deliberately, the way people had started moving their lips around me, loud and shaped, as if I were a child learning a language. "Are you well?" she asked. I nodded. She did not look convinced. She kept hold of my hands. Then she said something I almost missed. Said it at her natural pace, not the slow performance she had been using, and I caught it because I was watching carefully. She said, "He came to speak to your father last month." I kept my face still. I squeezed her hands once, and let go, and picked up the bread pan from the counter, because I had learned, by then, that the most useful thing I could do, in a room full of information, was to appear occupied. Eli had gone to speak to my father. About what? My mother either did not know or would not say. I turned the bread pan in my hands and did not ask. I was afraid that if I asked, she would tell me. And if she told me, something would be required of me that I was not yet ready to give. She left the next morning. She hugged me longer than usual at the door. I did not know it then, but it would be 3 months before I saw her again, and by that time everything would have already been decided. Autumn arrived. Hannah began to recognize my face, to reach for my fingers, to make sounds that I felt more than heard, vibrations against my chest when I held her close. She was the most complete thing in my life during those months. Everything else was becoming unclear, not because of my hearing, but because I was slowly understanding that the world around me had reorganized itself in my absence, while I was occupied with survival, and I had not been consulted. The night of the wood stove, the night I told you about at the beginning, came on a Thursday in November. Eli had told me that morning, through careful, oversized lip movements, that some men from the church would be visiting. Business matters. He used the word discussion. He looked at me when he said it with the expression he had been using for months. Gentle, patient, slightly sorrowful, the expression of a man tending to something broken. I set out cups. I brought the coffee pot. I took my seat by the window with my mending, which I had learned to use as effectively as any shield, and I waited. Bishop Stoltz arrived first, then Caleb, then Deacon Hartman, who had driven 2 hours, and who did not look at me. Eli thanked me for the coffee with a nod. I folded a small hem, and bent my head over my work, and I watched their mouths in the reflection of the dark window glass. They were not whispering. Deacon Hartman spoke first. He said my name, Sarah, and then he said that the situation was one that required clarity and Christian charity. He said that a wife who could not fulfill her household duties fully, who could not hear her husband's instruction, or participate in community worship in a normal way, placed a burden on the family that the district needed to address. Eli said, "She is not suffering. She is cared for." Caleb said something I missed. His jaw worked differently than the others, quicker, and I lost a phrase. But then Stoltz said, "The child is the concern. The child needs a mother who is present." Eli said, "I agree." Deacon Hartman said, "Then we are in agreement about the arrangement." I set down my mending. Not suddenly. I set it down the way you set something down, when your hands have decided before your mind has caught up. I smoothed it over my knee once. Then I looked up. I looked directly at Eli. He was watching the deacon. He did not notice me look at him. None of them did, because they had spent 6 months understanding me as a woman who existed in a different, quieter world. A woman for whom their conversation was nothing but moving air. The arrangement, as I would come to understand it fully over the following days, was this. Eli would formally petition the bishop to allow him to take a second wife, a practice that existed nowhere in any legitimate tradition I knew, but that Deacon Hartman's district had apparently found a theological framing for in cases of a wife's incapacity. I would remain in the household. I would keep Hannah. My role would be reduced, redefined, restructured. All words I had seen on Eli's lips in recent weeks without knowing what they attached to. And I had been sitting in the room for all of it, every conversation, every visit, every quiet word exchanged over my head, because they believed I could not hear them. I stood up. Eli noticed then. He looked at me with the gentle, patient expression, and he moved his lips carefully. "Sarah, go rest. We are just finishing." I looked at Bishop Stoltz. I said, out loud, in a voice I had not used at full strength in months, because I had been listening rather than speaking. I said, "I would like to know what arrangement you have reached." The room went the particular kind of quiet that happens when something impossible has occurred. Eli's face did not become angry. It became something worse than angry. It became the face of a man recalculating. Stoltz set down his cup. Caleb looked at the table. Deacon Hartman finally looked at me. I said, "I can hear you. I have been able to hear portions of your conversations for some time." I did not correct the misunderstanding, because I was trying to understand what the misunderstanding was protecting. Eli said, very quietly, "Sarah," I said, "I would like Clara brought here, the midwife. I would like her to explain to Bishop Stoltz what she recommended in November when Hannah was born, and what was not followed." I had not planned those words. I want to be honest about that. I had been carrying information for months without knowing what I would do with it, and standing in that room, I found that the words were simply there, formed by months of watching and waiting and understanding, finally, that no one was coming to ask me what I needed. The weeks after that evening were not clean or simple. Bishop Stoltz was a careful man, and a careful man does not abandon an arrangement without documentation. Clara came. She confirmed what she had told Eli in November. She confirmed, with the flat calm of a woman who had been waiting to be asked, that she had recommended a doctor, that partial hearing recovery was possible, and that Eli had told her the matter was settled. There was no second wife. That arrangement died in the room where it had been negotiated, though it took the better part of a winter for everything it had set in motion to finally stop moving. My hearing did not return fully. It has been 23 years, and I still live in a world where sound arrives as if through a closed door in an adjacent room. Present, but softened. I miss certain things. My daughter's voice at full clarity, rain on the tin roof, the sound of hymns as they were meant to sound, not as vibration but as music. Hannah is 23 now. She was the first person I told about that evening, told completely, without softening, when she was old enough to understand why her father and I had not remained in the same house. She asked me once whether I was angry. I told her I had been, for a long time, and that anger was useful when it told you something true, and less useful when it kept you from hearing the quieter things. She laughed at that. She said, "Mama, only you would use a hearing metaphor." I left the district the following spring, with Hannah and one bag, and the mending I had been using as a shield for 6 months. I moved to a community 2 states away, smaller and quieter, where a bishop named Miller had no previous understanding of who I was, or what I could and could not do. I built something there. Slowly, the way you build anything worth having. I think about that chair by the wood stove sometimes. I think about the 4 men in the room and the particular confidence with which they spoke. Not cruelly, not with theatrical malice, but with the ordinary, unexamined confidence of people who have decided that a woman's limitations define the perimeter of her understanding. What they did not account for, what I had not even fully accounted for myself, was that losing one way of receiving the world does not remove you from it. It sometimes makes you more careful, more observant, more patient with the distance between what people say and what they mean. I sat in that room for 2 hours with my mending and my reflection in the dark window glass, and I understood more about my marriage, my community, and the arrangement being made for my future than any of the men around the wood stove had intended to share. They spoke about me freely because they believed I could not hear them. I let them believe it long enough to understand everything I needed to know. Hannah asked me once whether I would have done things differently, whether I would have spoken sooner, corrected the misunderstanding earlier, forced the conversation before it became an arrangement. I thought about it honestly. I told her I did not know. I told her that sometimes the only information available to a woman in a room full of decisions being made without her is the information she can gather while appearing to be absent. The last thing I kept from that house was the mending I had been working on that Thursday evening. A plain linen square, hem half finished, folded twice, and tucked into the bottom of my bag when I left. I finished it the first winter in the new community, in a rented room with a wood stove of my own. I still have it. The stitching is uneven where my hands were not steady. I find that I do not mind the unevenness. It was finished in a room where no one was deciding anything about me, and I could hear, or not hear, exactly as much as I chose.